Hello and welcome to another managerial special from the Honest Football Podcast. We are back thanks to Barrow on Christmas Eve to talk about the appointment of Michael Jolley, who appoints a manager on Christmas Eve. And then, by the way, before we get into the episode, I'm sorry for the rant at the start. They've said the caretaker, still taking charge on Boxing Day. So there was no need for all of this. However, we are back to discuss Barrow giving the job to Michael Jolley after David Dunn left his role recently. Craig and Charlie are with me as always. And lads, I'll start, as we always do, with the old manager first. So David Dunn, a bit of a difficult position he came into, really. Obviously, they got promoted in the summer to from the National League, Barrow. Ian Evatt left to go to Bolton Wanderers, and David Dunn took over a club that had momentum, but not always the time you want to take over. So what are your initial thoughts on him leaving, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stats don't look great. I think 22 games, 2 wins, but they drew 11 games. They drew half their games, which... Do you know what it is? Is where you're coming from at this. Is it a team who've obviously just been promoted into the Football League? Is it just, let's just survive? However we do that, we'll live to the end of the season or something like that? You know, is that your expectation? Because obviously it's not ideal, but those numbers would keep you up. If you're drawing half your games, you're probably going to stay up, and then you pick up a few wins here and there. I know they're just above the relegation zone now, but do you know what I mean? It's that kind of principle. It depends if you want more. If you want more, then it probably was the right move to get rid of him. But I don't know. Are they being overambitious quite early on? I mean, I'm sure we'll discuss that a bit later on, but I can see why they got rid of him, but you just got to be a bit careful how many of these more managers you're going to go through in the position that Barrow are in.
And Craig, I mean, Charlie highlighted it quite nicely. Yes, the stats weren't great. Yes, there were a lot of draws. I mean, taking away the cup competitions, the league record wasn't great either. And if the other sides win their games in hand, they could overtake them. But David Dunn was relieved of his duties when Barrow were outside the relegation zone. And surely that was all his remit must have been at the start of the season. There can't have been more than that, given the current financial climate.
I think they have been a bit too overambitious, to be honest, where you just got promoted. I think what didn't help them is not playing for 6-7 months when they were on that momentum. Obviously, Ian Evatt left as well. That hasn't helped. Yeah, it's a hard one for Barry because obviously when it's always hard for basically a new promoted side getting into the Football League, especially new. Obviously, Harrogate as well. Obviously, they're in the bottom half of League 2 at the moment. And yeah, the main thing is it is to be outside the relegation zone, and to be honest, that's what they're doing. They're outside at the moment. Obviously, there's 2 teams below them at the moment: Stevenage and Southend. Stevenage, I don't see anything special from them, and Southend at the moment they've picked up a little bit of form, but do I see them continue that? Probably not.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And Charlie, before we move on to the new man, I mean, we've got to talk about the Barrow situation, and Craig's hit it on the nail on the head for me, which is normally you talk about the momentum of a new side coming up, but because it was points per game, which they were ahead, they deservedly won it, but because of that, they hadn't had regular football. It's not like they were coming flying out the traps after loads of wins and loads of recent football, was it?
No, and it's you know, we spoke about the Football League and how tough it is anyway of all the leagues in the world. You know, trying to get out of any Football League division is so tough, and this year is probably stranger than others. You've got some bigger clubs in there. You've got, you know, your Boltons. I know they've had their difficulties, but do you know what I mean? There's teams like that in and around there. Tranmere have come down. And so the point I'm making is it's just where that expectation is. And having lost all that time of not being able to play, losing an influential manager, and I know I can understand why he's gone, you know, maybe the challenge at Bolton. You know, if you get a new manager and he's now a different philosophy, it takes time to change that. We said that in all of these manager specials. Whoever comes in, it always takes time. So I can understand, as I said, it's just tough because there's so many different variables that are going on all in one time that it was going to be a difficult task whoever took over. But I don't know what their expectation is, and I think that's always going to be the underlying difficulty. If any team gets promoted out of the National League, is what is your expectation at the beginning of the season? Plus, you throw in all of this other stuff. It was always going to be a tough situation for them, regardless of what players they had.
However, despite all of that, they have got a new man in, and despite my initial rant about the timing, I've got quite strong views on this appointment, so I'll be interested to see what yours are. Because Barrow have appointed Michael Jolley as the new first team manager. He has signed a 2.5-year deal, but interestingly, they announced from the start that he had a summer break clause, which quite often is the sort of thing that's hidden. So if they go down or if he wants to, either party can break in the summer without a financial penalty. So that was an interesting one for me. But Michael Jolley, I don't know if you know much about him, lads, has got quite the interesting backstory. So he hadn't really had a playing career. He is a banker who was working in America. He's also had stints in Sweden as a first-team manager. He's managed with Sean Dyche at Burnley as a head coach for the under-23s under him. He's managed in Scotland for university teams. And he's also worked for Grimsby most recently at the same level, kept them up, and then in the first full season finished 17th, was relieved of his duties while they were in 18th place last season. And looking at things this year, that might not have been such a bad job to do after all. He's also had coaching spells earlier in his career at the likes of Crystal Palace and at Nottingham Forest as well. So he's worked at a range of clubs in a range of roles. So what do you think of the appointment, Craig? First question to you.
Well, it looks like he was Bob Wally in the last job at Grimsby, how that ended.
Yes.
I'm not sure on this one, to be honest. I'm quite amazed that he's got the job, in my opinion. He wasn't really spectacular at Grimsby. I know, obviously, Grimsby in League Two have just been steady, never too high, never too low.
Well, based on this season, that looks good though, doesn't it?
It's exactly the same. Well, to be honest, we're obviously going to do a Grimsby special once Grimsby announced a new manager. But I'm just not keen on this. I want Barrow to survive. I really do.
Yeah, so do I.
I'm not sure this is the right manager.
Fair enough. Charlie, I'll come over to you. I know Craig loosely touched on the situation that perhaps led to part of his departure from Grimsby, which possibly in reflection wasn't the smartest moment. But, you know, for other reasons, managers since have had rants about Grimsby for various reasons. So we've got to be fair on that front. But Charlie, what do you make of the appointment? Does your view differ to Craig's at all?
From a footballing perspective, taking out all the other stuff, it's not a free hit this, but Barrow, you know, newly promoted club, I suppose what I'm getting at is that there was never the expectation for them to finish in the top 8 and get a playoff place or anything like that. So he's only really, and let's be honest, potentially the way that teams like Stevenage are the form they've been in, he only really needs to pick up between now and the end of the season, maybe 6, 7, 8 wins. You probably don't need to be an outstanding manager to keep Barrow up in this situation that they're in. I just think that the risk is the long-term thing after that is at Grimsby, he kept up. I think he come in 10 games from the end of the season and kept Grimsby in the Football League, which is great. But then after that, never really accelerated on from there. I think they started the last season quite well, but you know, by September, end of September, October, they'd fallen off. So I think it's a short-term appointment. I don't really see there being much wrong with it, but I don't think he's the man at Barrow in the same way that, you know, Ian Everett has obviously got a legacy there. I don't think we're going to have the same thing with him. But I might be proven wrong. The good thing is he's got a lot of time on his side. He's a young manager in terms of in comparison to others. So, you know, maybe not the worst appointment, but I think there's probably better candidates out there.
They said, going back to you, Craig, that the standard of, I know they would always say this, but the calibre of candidates was extremely high and that Michael hugely impressed them in 2 rigorous interviews, says the statement. But as Charlie mentioned, he did end at Grimsby after a 7-game winless run. It left them in 18th. They were drifting down. Albeit Grimsby aren't much better off now because of the recent situation there. I guess moving on is neither of us had them to go down this season. Do you see that continuing?
I don't see anything special in this Barrow side. I think the main thing Barrow is just literally pick up points. It doesn't have to be spectacular, as you've said about every managerial appointment. Just get enough to survive. The main thing is surviving. I think they'll do it. I do think Southend, despite being on good form, will dip again. And Stevenage, we all know about Stevenage. Stevenage should have been relegated last season for Macclesfield's problems. But yeah, they just obviously they've got that good win against Cheltenham 3-0. That's a good start, even though he wasn't in charge for that. But it's a good start because they stopped that run of 5 straight defeats. They got scored convincingly and they kept the clean sheet. And that was with fans. So it probably did make a difference for them. That sort of momentum needs to keep going on. Now they've got 3-4 run of games straight away. As it was Boxing Day, 29th, and then New Year's, 2nd of January, and then January the 6th. Those could potentially be a good running for Barrow, sorry. But it depends. If they lose those 4, it could be very tight. But I think they'll survive.
And Charlie, coming back to you, I mean, Craig mentions it. We're coming towards January. The window will be open. There's a chance to do a bit of wheeling and dealing. They've got some good players in there. Both of the front 2 scored at the weekend. They looked a threat and they won convincingly. So is that going to make a difference, Charlie? And the same question to you. What do you predict for the rest of the season with Barrow?
In terms of that, the next 2 games, I think, next 3 games, you've got Port Vale, Exeter and Tranmere. You know, I'm not saying you write them off, but any new manager coming in, we talk about bounce, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But after that, then you're looking at Southend, Scunthorpe, those sort of teams. So it's hard because really how much of an assessment do you get from your team in playing against the two or three teams in the top 8? And Tranmere will probably, their position belies them a little bit because they've been a bit resurgent recently. So I don't think he's going to know who he wants to bring in until probably mid-Jan after he's played, you know, the likes of Southend, Scunthorpe, etc. Is there much out there though that you're going to get in at this short notice? It's going to be a bit of wheeler dealing. I think maybe dipping into the National League might be a better option rather than trying to go for established Football League players. But as I say, I do still see this as a bit of a free hit for him, really. He's coming into quite a difficult situation as it is. There's not loads he can do wrong. So I don't know if they need to add loads to that squad. Will they stay up? I can't see why they wouldn't. Well, yeah, I think they've got enough quality in there. I think I shouldn't say this because it sounds horrible. There's probably too many teams that are in too much of a dire situation to sustain. You know, Southampton are in a bit of form now, but they're going to keep up all year, not with the resources and they've got. And Stevenage essentially have a National League squad because that's what they were preparing for in their defence. So I just think this year Barrow will be all right because there's too many other worse teams around them.
I hope you're absolutely right. I'll give my opinion. I actually think Michael Jolley, from a footballing point of view, is a good appointment. There is obviously a little alarm about a couple of the personal off-the-pitch bits that have happened in the past, but I'm hoping that he did a solid job with Grimsby and he'll do the same again, because I think we've both said it here. We want Barrow to stay up, don't we? So hopefully Barrow will stay in the Football League. Hopefully the chairman will be supportive of him if he does keep them up, as he wasn't with David Dunn outside the relegation zone. But that's our views on the Barrow managerial appointment and change at the club. Let us know what you think in the comments below if you're a Barrow fan. If you did enjoy this episode, please do put a thumbs up on it. Subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast. You can see our championship predictions for Boxing Day in the eye above somewhere. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on Twitter over at Honest Football 3. And we'll see you next time. Have a good Christmas.